Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What was the we need to leave now gut feeling that turned out to be true? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Part 2 tomorrow. Me and my little sister went camping in the woods very close to our house when we were kids. We'd seen this bald guy with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which isn't unusual for the area. You'll often see people walking and saying hello. For some reason, though, I just got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both just gave each other this look. I don't know what it was that made me do it. This is very out of character for me, but I took a photo of the back of him as he was walking away. A while later, we see the same guy near the lake. He comes over and asks about the tent we're carrying, where we'll be setting up, and are we camping with our dad? We say yes, we're just going to see him now, a lie. We must have had the same moment of psychicness, because we walked off up a fork in the path until we were out of view, then looked at each other, and jumped down a path hidden by the bushes and waited behind them on the parallel trail for a bit. The guy watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog until he couldn't see us, then turned around and ran up the path after us. Thankfully, he didn't see us hidden and carried on straight where he thought we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea and went home. That evening, my mom shows us a post in the local residents group, which is a picture of the same bald guy trying to break into someone's house. Apparently, he'd just been walking around trying people's front doors and claimed to be a repair guy when he was stopped. I dread to effing think what his intentions were, but it was very lucky that me and my sister knew those woods so well. Otherwise, we wouldn't have thought to go down one of the hidden paths. Years ago, before cell phones, I was driving home from dropping my husband off at the train at 4:30 a.m. Only me and one other car were on the road. He started turning where I turned twice, so I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. It turns out he was following women home, driving past their house, and doubling back to R them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. I was in Taco Bell with my daughter, and I saw a guy come in and back out with a t-shirt over his hand. I told her to dump her tray and get moving. We went out to the car quickly and left. I found out later on the news that the guy robbed the place with a gun hiding under his t-shirt. Years ago, when I was still living at home with my parents, I drove home around 2 a.m. As I parked my car, I noticed a man walking down the street. I decided to wait until he passed my car, and it was enough for me to get out. Instead, he passed my car and hid behind the van that was directly parked behind me. I guess he did not think I was paying attention to him. So I called my dad, who was asleep, to come down and get me. He did, and when the guy saw my dad, he immediately ran away. I was lucky. I was 12 at the time, and my favorite thing in the world was spending the night at my grandma's house. We lived in the sticks at the time, and my grandma lived closer to the nearest town. Thursday night was grandma's night. I felt something off one Thursday night and asked my mom if I could stay home with my mom and dad. They reluctantly agreed. I went home, watched some TV, and went to bed. My bedroom was in the adjoining wall to the living room. I wasn't really asleep, but I heard my mom keep saying my dad's name over and over again with a hint of panic. I sneak out to the living room, and my dad is on the couch with his head tilted back, snoring really loudly, which wasn't uncommon. But my mom was beside him, shaking him and telling him to wake up. She yelled at me to go back to bed. I didn't, obviously. I snuck into their bedroom to call 911. I told the dispatcher that my dad was asleep and my mom was trying to wake him up, but she couldn't. Eventually, the phone call went to the living room, and my mom talked to the dispatcher. They sent an ambulance to the middle of nowhere. My dad had taken a bottle of diazepam to try to commit suicide. I remember sitting on the floor holding his hand and repeating over and over that I loved him. The ambulance came and took him to the hospital. Lights and sirens the whole way. We didn't know what happened during that time, but we found out a day later or so, and that is when our world changed. I'm very sure if I had not called 911 that night, my dad would have succeeded, and it would have probably driven my mom over the edge as well. and I have no idea why I didn't want to stay that night at my nanny's. I just had the feeling that I needed to go home. That is pretty wild. And yeah, I think you were a big part of saving your father's life, so yeah. I hope things got better in the family. I bartend, and years ago I kicked this guy out because he was acting very strange, muttering under his breath that he would kill my other customers. He was just really hostile. He had missing fingers on one hand, and he was kind of a bigger guy. After the bar closed, I was almost finished counting money, so like an hour after everyone left. I was just about to leave, and I had that gut feeling. I looked out the window, and that guy was standing on the corner watching me in a ski mask. I knew it was him because of the build. As soon as I grabbed my phone, he took off, but the cops know who he is. Now he has a vendetta against me, and he's well known around town. He's effing nuts. I stopped by a friend's house to watch a ball game. He, his wife, and I were just relaxing when someone knocked on the door. It was the middle of the afternoon, and when he opened it up, he was expecting others might come by as well. I hear him greeting someone. The guy was his brother, whom I had never met, but had heard about. My friend told me that he had a brother who lived in the area who had a serious drug problem. Buddy is talking to his brother about nothing, and the guy gets a call on his cell. Whoever called, all he told them was, "Not yet, I'll call you later." It seems pretty obvious that this guy has come to rob and is most likely to take out witnesses. I look at my buddy, and it seems he has come to the same conclusion. Now, my buddy's wife is a no-nonsense type of woman, sweet but athletic, on the tall side. She had left the room to go to the bathroom, or so she said. She comes back in the room with a handgun. I'm thinking, what the did I walk into? But she calmly says, "Ron, you're strung out and came here with bad intentions. You need to quietly leave. If you get any ideas, Chris, their son, is sitting outside in his truck to make sure you go." Ron doesn't say a word. He just turns and goes out the door. We can hear his old pickup truck drive away rapidly. Chris comes in and says, "He's gone. I don't think he's coming back." They asked me to leave so they could decide what to do. They've already called the police, who are well acquainted with Ron. The next morning my buddy called me, and the police said they found his brother in the trailer park where he lived, murdered with multiple gunshots. They're guessing he was in serious drug debt and had come to rob his brother. I told my buddy I was sorry. He said, "Don't be." I sit in my friend's backyard with their 2 kids, my husband, and another friend enjoying pizza that my host made. It was a beautiful, clear day with no real wind. We're having a great time just out of the pool and hungry for pizza when I suddenly feel on edge. I looked straight at the kids, about 8 and 10 or so years old, and just said, "Get in the house." We all scrambled, and a second later we hear creaking, and maybe 5 seconds after it started, this big branch fell off their pine tree onto the table where we were sitting. Thankfully, no one was hurt besides having to pick pine needles out of pizza. I can only assume that I subconsciously heard the branch start to give. Wednesday midday run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer in, I felt people watching me and directly turned around and ran home, even though I did not see anybody. I closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to the door, and I didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later, 2 guys were at my front door trying to push it in. I was luckily on the other side of the door at that moment and pushed it back closed with all my force and began screaming. I managed to lock the front door and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went into. Looking back at the apartment security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pulling apart the magnetic security gates, 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanical lock that cannot be pulled apart. Doesn't "I need to go home now" feeling count? And it wasn't me, but my mom. Anyway, I was around 12 or so, and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors. We all kept to ourselves, and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door without being seen. I look out and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, and just Something feels off, so I ignore him and wait for him to leave, but he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill. I'm alone, and now I'm getting scared. I go and hide and plan to wait for my mom, except she just left. I had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, my mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently, she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet, but she turned around immediately. I found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently, he was acting very strangely and made my mom nervous. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted or how my mom knew to come home, but I'm very grateful she did. My brother and I were kids playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3 and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever. So I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar and neither were the men. They both got out of the car and approached my brother. They started asking him questions and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door and screamed, "Someone's trying to kidnap Steve." My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. When we were in our teens, my sister and I were walking our dog in a local forest area which was very close to our childhood home. We were about to leave and had just clipped our dog back up when a lady appeared out of nowhere and started chatting with us. She was odd. She told us her dog would love some socialization with our dog and that we could go back with her for 5 minutes. What I hadn't clocked, but my sister had, was that her dog was nowhere to be seen. The lady was almost rounding us up to head back toward the forest when little did we know, my sister had spotted a van out of the corner of her eye. I was still oblivious at this point. Suddenly my sister screams, "Dad!" And to our luck, my dad had finished work and was now out on a run. He starts waving and running toward us, and we turn back around and the lady had vanished. My sister looks back over at the van and sees the lady closing the passenger door and it speeding off. Dogs are still nowhere to be seen. I believe we were minutes away from abduction. It was divine intervention that led my dad happened to be at the right place at the right time. I was freshly married in my early 20s living in Fallbrook, California. My husband, ex, was a Marine and was at work, and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook, you have to travel along this long, dark, and windy street called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road, and all of a sudden the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing her down even further. But I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive. But something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with my one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd seen someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently, there have already been calls about this girl over the last hour. and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard a few weeks later about it, some carjacking robbery attempts in the area. I was very relieved to listen to my instincts that night.
He says, I don't like this. Something feels off. I feel like I'm being watched, like I'm bait. I didn't want to leave, as it was excellent surf, but this guy was a marine biologist, so I took his instinct as a sign to play it safe. We paddled back across the deep channel together as quickly as we could without panicking, and walked the 15-minute trek back to the parking lot, talking shit the whole way. I got his mobile number for future surfs together, given how small town it is here, and not knowing anyone. We noticed a 15-foot inflatable boat pull up near the reef and hang around for a bit without much thought. Later that night, while looking at my social media, I read about 3 fishermen at the same location we were at that morning at the same time in their boat. As they pulled up to check their cray pots on the beach side of the reef, they were circled twice by a great white shark that was as big as their boat. That guy most likely saved me from a horrible experience that day. I messaged him with the link to the Facebook page with the comments regarding their experience. Chills ran through my body for a good 20 minutes. He was adamant that he felt the presence of something, and he was right. Standing outside my friend's house, watering their garden while they were away on vacation, not even 30 seconds after I shut the door and locked it, about 6 men started pounding on the door, reaching in the mail slot, trying to unlock said door, telling me to come out, calling me cutie, and other degrading pet names. A friend called me and said, there's a wildfire 8 miles away, can you help me move my horses? So I drove down. She was wrong. It was 8 miles by car, under 2 as the crow flies. We got the first set of horses out and down to another farm. The second set I was working on, and suddenly things got quiet. It's as if the world stopped for a minute. I look at the horse, and the horse looks like it's ready to run. I take a deep breath, and suddenly the noise comes back. The wind is hot, and the light changes. I told Sherry, the girl I was helping, we gotta go now. No time to shove the horses into the trailer. They are smart enough to survive, and I let them loose. We run to the truck, and the barn is already on fire. Then we get in the truck and notice the fire has passed us and is blocking the road. So we jumped out and ran to a small pond for the horses, and we dive in. I hope the fire doesn't burn us. It was about 20 minutes of hell. It might have been longer, I don't know. It was insanely scary, hot, and loud. We got rescued by the fire department's water-dropping helicopter. It landed in the field and pulled us in. We got lucky. The truck was burned to the frame, and the horse Sherry let go died. The one I let go of survived but was burned. That was most likely the scariest moment. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. My friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy and his blonde girlfriend kept babbling at us about taking headshots and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps. So I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5'8" and not a small girl at 13 years old. I was 4'9" and around 65 pounds at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there, just a few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos, serial killers. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion, but just for family within reasonable driving distance, probably 30 people altogether. It was at County Park on a small lake with some grills and buildings, just an empty hall with some picnic tables inside that you could rent for that kind of stuff. The sky started darkening as a storm was approaching. All the coolers, chairs, balls, and other kids' toys, etc. were brought into the building anticipating the rain. The plan was to wait it out since afternoon showers are common, just about every day in summer. Something in the air didn't feel or smell right, even though it appeared to be just a regular afternoon storm. My hair on my neck was standing up, and I was in full flight mode. I can't really describe it. The feeling in the pit of my stomach can only be described as absolute dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and said, "What's wrong?" Apparently, I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet, and I was full of panic, yelling for everyone to leave. Something wasn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car, and as soon as I was about to turn the key, the tornado sirens went off. We were not far from wherever they put those, or they're just stupidly loud, because it was deafeningly loud. Now the rest of the family is pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I look across the lake, maybe a few miles in the distance, and see a funnel cloud. I got the hell out of there, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for the family barbecue was completely annihilated, literally just a slab of concrete and a shit ton of debris all around. It was hit dead on by an EF3. I was walking down the street in a very unfamiliar city with a group of friends. I got this feeling and didn't know how to articulate it, so I said to the group, "Hey, I've got to use the restroom. Can we just duck inside the subway real quick? I promise I'll be quick." About a minute later, there was a shootout just up the block. If we hadn't gone into the restaurant, we would have all been standing right in the middle of the incident, waiting to cross the street. Viewing a flat that didn't exist. Not my story, but one my mom told me from her 20s when she was living and working in London, UK. I do my best to retell it, and I'm also dyslexic, so apologies in advance for the grammar. This story always gives me the creeps, though, when I think about it. So back in her 20s, my mom was living in London and looking to move into a slightly bigger place. She'd found a really good price for a flat slightly out of the area she was hoping for. She'd called the agent to book a viewing, and that's when things turned odd. So the guy booking the viewing started asking weird requests and questions, such as to bring her passport, her age, race, and physical appearance. Would she be coming on her own? Did she have a car, or would she be getting on the bus? He was very persistent in saying that she should arrive by bus, as it would be easiest for her. He explains that it was a straight road down from the bus stop to the apartment block. Obviously quite unnerved by this call, but still interested because the flat looked ideal. She and my dad, who were dating at the time, decided to check the exterior and surrounding area. The day before the viewing, they drove there, first passing the bus stop where he was indicating for her to arrive via. From the bus stop, there was about 150 or 200 meters of derelict wasteland that she would have to walk past to get to the flat. And standing at the end of the street in the location this apartment block should have been was a huge abandoned building. Smashed windows, graffiti, no entry signs, the lot. There was definitely nothing inhabitable in sight. Still, when she tells you this today, you can tell how much it rightly shook her. Of course, she didn't go to her viewing. However, she informed the police, advising them of the planned time and place. From what she saw and from following up with them, they didn't appear to take the tip seriously, and little was done. A couple of years later, though, while in a pub with some friends, she gets chatting with a guy she just met through mutual friends that night. He was with the police, and through conversation, her story came up. He said that the area at the time of her viewing had a huge human trafficking problem. It still gives me chills. Those were good instincts. Sometimes when an offer or job opportunity or a trip seem too good to be true, or in this case, an apartment, it usually is. So good on you. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out a 50 to 70 meter depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all get a very bad feeling, like we were being watched. I ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further, 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see, then glide back in the other direction a minute later. The decompression stop to get out was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. When I was a teenager, me and some friends were hanging out around midnight. A caravan drives past slowly with a few people looking up the windows. We all look at each other quietly. and the caravan pulls into a nearby parking space. We all get up and walk to our bikes because something feels really off. A few minutes later, we heard someone shout, and as I turned around, there were about 5 or 6 people getting out with metal pipes and other things in their hands. We ran so fast. Nothing happened, but I'm 99% sure we were about to get beaten and robbed. Back in 2019, me, my husband, and 2 girls aged 6 and 9 were on a road trip in the South. We had booked an apartment in Atlanta through Airbnb without knowing the neighborhood at all. It was bad, really sketchy, with a lot of creepy looking people hanging around. We went into the apartment and immediately my 6-year-old said, "I don't like it here." The door didn't lock properly, the beds were dirty, there was rotting food in the fridge, and the bathroom had not been changed or cleaned in ages. My husband called the owner, who was furious and refused to give us a refund. To de-escalate the situation, my husband offered to not leave a negative review if we could just get our money back. The owner agreed, but asked us to wait for him so they could talk about it in person. As soon as he hung up, I told my husband that we needed to leave now. We hurried to the car, and as we pulled out of the parking garage, we saw the owner driving up with 4 friends. He didn't see us, and we bolted out of there. I ended up at a hotel on the 14th floor and didn't even feel safe at street level.